Welcome to our actual 25th episode of Rethinking Trauma and Transition. We challenge the stigma surrounding the healing through our podcast. And we aim to empower those who are experiencing these challenges, providing them with the knowledge and language necessary to embark on a transformative journey towards a more fulfilling life. And who's our guest on this week, Ali?
We have Lee Marks joining us this week, and his area of expertise is domestic violence as experienced by men as the victims.
It is, yeah. Key takeaway from Lee is that domestic violence, no matter what, is gender neutral.
And more support is needed for anybody impacted by that.
Exactly. So if you are triggered by this, we will have support numbers and websites within the show notes as well.
Please do reach out. Be aware that in the conversations with Lee, while it's not hugely graphic, we do describe, and he does share some situations that some people may find very close to the bone.
Yeah.
Thank you, and we hope you enjoy the conversation.
Yeah. Thank you very much for listening.
So today we have Lee Marks joining us. So thank you very much for giving us your time, Lee. It's lovely to meet you. And we invited you on to, I suppose, have a conversation which doesn't get a huge amount of airspace and doesn't get a huge amount of time, yet is a big issue. And that's the issue of domestic violence against men. Because domestic violence in general is an issue, but there's a lack of debate about that and acknowledgement of that. And I know from following you on different platforms that you've done quite a bit of research on that, and we thought it would be good to have that conversation with you. So thank you for joining us tonight.
No, thank you very much for having me. And I think, it is important to acknowledge, I do specialize in the area of male victims, but as an advocate for victims of domestic abuse, I support females as much as I do males. It's just, this is my area of expertise.
Well, I think and I would agree wholeheartedly with you in that, in that whether that's narcissistic abuse, whether that's domestic violence, whether that's stalking, whether that's any of those realms of issues, these are gender neutral. They happen to everyone in all forms of relationships and all combinations of relationships. And that needs to be acknowledged.
100%. And that's one thing I've had a lot of acknowledgement with ever since I published my book. There's a number of female survivors that I know that read it and actually had a conversation with me afterwards saying, this blew my mind, because I was reading the book on the experiences that you've had and other men have had, and I sat there thinking, well, this happened to me. And I'm like, I know. And it's like that penny drop moment that, hang on a minute, that some of the behaviours that we're seeing are exactly the same. The only thing that differs in some areas that that you have to look at, that you have to acknowledge, is the level of harm that can be endured in some different instances.
Yeah. So if you don't mind me asking, Lee, what brought you into this field?
I fell into it by accident, to be quite honest. Going back many years ago, I worked as a young person's worker for an organisation that there was lots of different outlets. There was housing, there was criminal justice, and there was domestic abuse. I knew about the female team because they were massive and we all shared the same office. But there was one chap that worked in the office that sort of sparked my interest a little bit, because, someone said to me, oh, he works with male victims. And I was like, yeah, all right, whatever. And then one day he approached me and said, I just wondered, because I work with men, the chap that used to help me with my program has had to move. So I need some help. Do you fancy it? And I was like, okay, what is it? He said, I run a group program for male victims of domestic abuse. And, I chuckled. And I was like, mate, you being serious? Domestic abuse is something that happens to women, because, you know, that's what I always believed. That's, you know, all the messages that I heard was that it was a problem that affected women. But I'd like to think I've always been open-minded. So I said, yeah, go on then, I'll give it a shot. So I went along to this group program and sat there and listened to some of the things the men were saying, and it was just wow. Some of the things they were saying, I thought, hang on a minute, that sounds a little bit familiar. But then Jack took it into an exercise where he talked about the Duluth power and control wheel, which was one of the original tools that we used many, many years ago, developed in America to help women identify tactics of abuse from male perpetrators. But then he gave out copies of a gender neutral version because, as he rightfully said, you know what? I don't know why we have to look at it from a gender angle, because all of these behaviors that are on here can be perpetrated by both men and women. So he said, I've got a gender neutral version. I want you to have a look at it. And the idea of this exercise is that I want you to sit with a pen. And if you identify with these behaviors, just put a little tick by them. So he handed one to me, but I didn't really do anything with it. And I started watching these men. I could see the pens go, and I was like, wow. And he looked at me, he said, look, this is the way to learn. He said, join in, do the activity. So, you know, bit of bravado. I got my pen, and there was a section about children, nice big line through there, because I thought, you know what, the only proper relationship I had was with my ex, who, it wasn't the best of relationships. You know, it did end, and I was made to believe, you know, everything was my fault. This was how it was because of the things that I'd done. And I kind of accepted that, because it was like, you know, if friends are telling me that's the case, if family are telling me that's the case, it must be the case, surely. But then when I moved away from the children and I started looking at the other behaviors, I started ticking one after the other, after the other, after the other. And I found I couldn't speak. I was numb. And I was just looking at this thinking, oh my God. And I remember like it was yesterday, Jack just looking at me going, you okay? And I couldn't speak. I could just manage to shake my head, but he didn't make a big point of it. He carried on with the group and just left me sat there. And I can't even remember what else was spoken about. I just found myself staring at this sheet. And at the end of it, when everyone had gone, I sort of managed to acknowledge some of the guys as they left. And he said, are you okay? And all I could do was hand him the sheet. And he looked at it and he was just, oh my God. And he sat and he started looking through it and sort of saying, you know, who was this? And I said, it was my ex, you know, and started looking at some things, asking a few questions. And he just looked me in the eye and he went, mate, I'm really sorry. He said, you were a victim of domestic abuse. And it was like all those things that I believed about myself. It was like the floor being pulled out from under me. And it was just like this weight being lifted, because, you know, all of a sudden someone was saying to me what I believed was my fault. It wasn't. And I was just made to feel that way. Now, I think the worst thing of it was that, you know, you look at everything I've achieved and everything I've done to help other people since then. On 2 occasions, I tried to take my life after I separated from my ex. I've been successful. You know, all of this wouldn't have happened since. I'm so glad that it wasn't successful. And it's kind of gone on from there. And it gave me a real passion. You know, I took over from Jack. I worked with those male victims for 2.5 years. The only thing really that brought that to an end was the contract being taken over by someone else who didn't want the work happening in the way it was with male victims, and basically told me that I had to double my caseload and find my own referrals, and I had to step away. But I went into a field of substance misuse, and, you know, we were finding that it was happening there as well. And people were coming to me saying, I've got this bloke. And we started talking to it, and things just sort of spiraled on from there. So, you know, that's how I got into doing what I do and what I love.
Well, substance misuse, that's a cover up for something else, isn't it? To hide that pain.
Yeah. Yeah. And what we were finding was when we were doing intervention, we were talking about relationships, men started talking a little bit about things that they were experiencing, which is really, really interesting, because in my later career, I went to work at a rehab facility, And I found myself asked to run a group for 16 men that were in the facility. So there was me, 16 men, and the program they asked me to deliver started talking about men being perpetrators of abuse. And I remember coming out and going, hang on a minute, I'm not doing this because, you know, you're stereotyping. I believe from my experiences that at least some of these men could have been victims. So I broke protocol, so to speak, and I talked about perpetrators, but I also spoke about victims, and had a general conversation about relationships. And in that room of 16 men, all of them going back to the age of 18 through to about 24, all experienced female perpetrated domestic abuse, whether it be physical, whether it be emotional.
I think that need for, I suppose, gender neutrality in the approach, for me, is something that needs to be talked about more. But I can also equate with your experiences, Lee, because similarly, when I first started hearing about and looking at things like narcissistic abuse, gaslighting, etc., that was a penny drop moment for me. And I can equate with that moment where you suddenly go, whoa.
Yeah.
Actually, it shifts the entire perception of an experience.
Yeah.
But that's also really important in terms of the conversations that happen, is removing that gender specific element from it, because I think that neutrality, the conversation opens up so much more.
100%. And this has always been my argument. Regardless of who I speak to, I try to keep the conversation talking about anyone. You know, I always have the conversation of, well, why do we have to talk about him or her and him when we're talking about abusive relationship? Can't we just talk victim perpetrator? Because, you know, anyone can be a victim, anyone can be a perpetrator. The behaviors are very, very similar. There's no need to bring gender into play. I think every organization or professional that I've worked with, and there's been a lot, from a male perspective, and to a degree from a female perspective, when you're moving away from some of the larger entities, are happy to have those conversations, happy to remove gender from the equation, happy to, you know, listen to some of the experiences of men. You know, I've done conferences where I've done the same thing, where I've removed gender, and I've had workers come to me and say, I hear you, I hear what you're saying, I agree with what you're saying, but senior management will never accept this conversation the way it is. But you have to. I mean, we're seeing it at the moment, aren't we? There's a lot of conversations that are going on in media, not just on the subject of domestic abuse, but on the subject of men's mental health, you know, suicide rates, the campaigns for ministers for men. Now, this is something that I've been campaigning for about 3 years, and we just got knocked back every time we would bring the conversation up. But, you know, you're seeing it. There's evidence there that for everybody to see, that when, you know, I watched a program the other day where someone's talking about male suicide rate, and the presenter chuckled. And then as soon as he talked about it and they went to some of the guests to talk about it, there was no acknowledgement of the fact that he said we need a minister for men to look at men's issues, you know, things like suicide rate. It just went straight onto, but what about these issues that women face? Yeah. Nobody's disputing that. Nobody's disputing those issues are there. And for the majority of us that support men, and I would say the overwhelming majority, we campaign on behalf of the things that you know, women need and are identified that need to be addressed. But we just feel very frustrated that when we try then to have that conversation, we don't get the same support. We get shut down.
Well, I've heard a comment from someone who said is men's rights or the equivalent of like women's rights back in the 60s or 70s in certain aspects.
I would agree with that wholeheartedly. I would consider myself, and I found this when I was at university, which was a bit of a shock to me, because my experiences as I've worked in this field have all been negative, from people campaigning for female issues. I've had all sorts of threats angled my way, which I just thought, wow. And I've developed quite a tough skin over the last couple of years. But when we were talking about that one, because I did my master's in understanding domestic and sexual violence, and you know, we looked at all sorts of types of feminists, and the lady running the course, she was absolutely fantastic because she talked about extremist feminists. And I was sat there thinking, this is what I've been experiencing. And then I learned what feminism was in its purest form. And I was like, yeah, do you know what? I'm a feminist because I agree in equality for women, but not at the detriment of men.
Mm-hmm.
And what it feels like has happened is you go back and you have that whole where the feminist movement started, and it needed to happen 100%. But somewhere along the lines, it's kept going. And this other side of it is taken over. And what has happened is the balance is gone level and it's now gone past. And now what we're finding is we're ignoring things that are affecting men. They're not spoken about. When they're brought up, they're shut down because that balance has just shifted too far. What we need is to find the middle ground.
Agreed. Yeah.
What I see quite a lot of is behaviours that were that to be a man that was expressing that viewpoint, that behaviour, that phraseology, then they would be trolled to within an inch of their life and pilloried like you wouldn't believe. Yet women, to a large extent, do not get the same response. And I know that's probably going to be a vastly unpopular thing I've said with a lot of people, but tough. That's what I see.
It's true.
And I think there's almost that stop check that says, actually, if I want to go forward and say these are the behaviours I would like expressed towards me by people that I am in the circle with, I have interactions with regardless of gender, then I have to be prepared to display those back.
100%.
And if I am not, then I am in myself perpetuating a disparity and an inequality that is counterproductive. It undermines my own request for equality. Because while we're possibly at the start of that drive for equality, there was a need for that very strong feminine voice to say, no, we want more than this, and we need to have that equal voice. I think there comes a point where we have to kind of drop the gender on that and have a gender neutral conversation that says, actually, what's the needs of our community? And there may well be specific issues that are more prevalent in one gender more than the other, regardless, or one part of our population, regardless. But the point of that is to bring everybody up to a level, not at the detriment of someone else.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with everything you've just said. And that's the approach that we try to encourage people to take. You know, I've got people that I work with that work in very, very similar fields to me. And I find it disturbing that every day he is able to come to the table and say, here's another load of examples from social media where you can actually hear that you read the words, kill all men.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just really disturbing that sort of thing is happening.
I mean, there's millions and millions of hashtags of that.
Yeah. That shouldn't be able to happen.
No. You
know, I, myself, everybody that I engage with through social media, and now I've stepped away from some of my social media because some of the things that I've had sent to me, we challenge any behavior that we come across that we think is misogynistic in any way, or not following that message that we feel needs to be out there, where we're opening the doors and saying, do you know what, we're prepared to sit around the table and talk about how we can support each other. But if we're doing that, we need to see that coming the other way as well.
Mm-hmm. I guess they've got a belief that one issue is going to take away from another issue, when it doesn't matter. Both have got an issue, and as you said earlier, it's relative to each other, but we've got our own problems. They need addressing.
They do. We currently have, I believe, 2 ministers for women, which when that happened, I was like, yes, finally, we needed this. Yet when we start talking about a minister for men, that the conversation has just stopped. You know, someone will start talking about it, and straight away the conversation has turned out, yeah, but what about this that women are facing? Well, we've acknowledged it. We've got a minister for women. We are working around these issues. We're not saying give us a minister for men so we can ignore those issues. We've always said, give us a minister for men that can look at some of these issues like suicide, like homelessness, like, you know, leaving education, like number of people in prisons are predominantly men. So those things can be addressed, but at the same time, that minister for men can walk alongside the minister for women to be able to work on some of the issues that they are facing as well. And I think you're exactly right. That's not being heard. The fear is you just want to take away from us, and that's not the case at all. And that's not the case when we're talking about domestic abuse either.
Mm-hmm. Almost like there's an assumption the minute that challenge is put out there, the assumption is that you're not hearing the need for a minister for women. And that's not the argument at all. What it's saying is there are big issues on all sides, in all areas of our community. And where something is showing a high prevalence and a high predominance or rate within that, then we need to address it. And if it is within a specific sector, then maybe we need the focus in there to make sure that gets the attention to resolve that, to put the support in. Now, whether that means that that's male or female or whatever, it doesn't really matter. What we're saying is there's a big issue here that is an unequal representation in our society. Shouldn't we ask why?
Yeah.
Shouldn't we invest to find out?
Sorry, Ali. And that whataboutism just completely deflects away from those issues.
Yeah. And I believe it did make me chuckle when I first saw it, because, you know, again, there was a whole hashtag on social media started when we were going, hang on a minute, yeah, we get this, but what about some of the issues men are facing that we're campaigning to get people to look at? And straight away we were being hashtag whataboutism. And, you know, there were whole debates going on about, why do men do this? Why do men start talking about their issues when we need to address the issues of women? Well, actually stop, take a look. There's lots of us that are talking about the issues affecting women. There's lots of us that advocate for those. There's lots of us that support those. What we're saying is, give it the other way.
Well, I think what we're saying is it doesn't have to be an either or.
Yeah.
It can be as well.
Absolutely.
And actually, isn't that either or the very definition of inequality? And as well, the definition of equality. You know, so unless we're prepared to have that, unless we're prepared to acknowledge that there may be issues there that are prevalent in separate parts of the community, separate genders, separate races, ethnicities, whatever, and address them with appropriate support, then we're always going to have those inequalities. We're never going to get to that point where we are just people.
Absolutely. absolutely, and that's what's got to happen. And you know, this whole thing is a big wide issue. You know, where I specialize with domestic abuse, it's a small subsection, but this is something I've been talking about for years. This is something, this was one of the reasons behind me writing and releasing my book that I wrote, because you know, when we looked, there were loads of books that you could get and you could read that will sort of explain the dynamics of abuse and what you can do if you're a female victim. But there was nothing, there was absolutely nothing out there for men. And when it was the BBC did their documentary Abused by My Girlfriend, the Alex Gill story, I sat and watched that with my wife that I'm with now. Now, she supported me all the way through when I discovered about me being a victim. She supported all the work that I did when I was working in the male domestic abuse service. She still supports all the work that I do now. She is the catalyst behind me releasing my book. We watched the Alex Gill story, and you know, I'm not too proud to admit I cried, because I watched that and I was just like, this is the experience of so many other men that I work with, and a few years on and nothing has changed. I said, this is disgusting. This is why I felt I had to leave the industry. And she said, I'll never forget it. She looked me square in the eye and she said, well, instead of sitting there and whinging about it, why don't you do something about it? I said, what do you mean? She goes, you got all this personal experience, all these years of experience working in that sector, through the family court, through police, through everything you did. You've got enough knowledge there, do something. And I kind of sat there and thought, well, where do I start? And she said, just write it down. Write down what you know. And I think over a period of about 3 months, I just wrote and wrote and wrote. And I was sat there with the laptop. And each night when I finished, I was like, wow, have I really just done all that? And after 3 months, when I had everything down, I thought, there's nothing else I can put down. And I started looking back through it and I was like, wow, there's a book here. And that was a bit daunting because, you know, I'd never been academically minded at the time, but I started moving stuff around, putting it in place. And it just so happened that there was a chap working at the substance service that I was with, who was working on the Drive project, which is working with perpetrators. And I'd had a few conversations with him, and I said, do you want to have a bit of a read of what I've written? And he said, yeah, all right, mate. And I handed in the manuscript, and his first reaction was, oh, you weren't joking. And he took it away and he read it. He took it on the Friday night. On the Sunday, I got a call from him saying, I ain't been asleep. He said, I started reading it and man, you have hit the nail on the head with this. He said, there's a few things that we need to look at. He's been my voice of reason, because he said, right, if we just go to this subject, when you're talking about this, you've mentioned a celebrity by name. You don't own much, but if we leave that in there, you're not going to own anything. So he pulled stuff out. He added stuff in from his experience as well. And lo and behold, we had Break the Silence, the support guide for male victims. Now, we sat and had many conversations, and he said, and he agreed with me, if we help one person, we've done a job. That's what we're here for. We tried to get a publishing deal to start with. Nobody was interested. The responses we had was, thank you, but this just wouldn't sell, because, you know, people talk about female victims, but not men. So we were like, right, how do we do this? So we self-published on Amazon. And in the first month, we sold, and this was with no advertising whatsoever, we sold 112 copies. And when that came through and we saw it, it was just like, wow. We were getting lots of emails because we thought, you know, we needed an email set up so people could contact us. And then we ended up doing training, and we set up Break the Silence UK as an organization, which unfortunately didn't pan out, but it opened so many doors. We've had relatives contact us. We've had female victims contact us, which is why we brought in one of our female colleagues to work with us as well. You know, even though the organization's not there now, the impact of the book has been so vast that even now, we're getting emails on that email address from men, from women, looking for that conversation in an open forum, looking for support in an open forum. And just last week, I received the latest email from a man that said, I discovered your book and thank you because it saved my life.
Well, I think this is great because, I mean, I think, Rich, you're the same as I. We both have worked with men who are either currently experiencing and living in a domestic violence situation, or have and are still dealing with the aftermath of that, the emotional damage, the physical damage, the damage to esteem, and the huge array of emotions. You know, we're working with men who have been sexually assaulted by women, who have been abused by women. And that doesn't negate the experiences of women, but it still needs to be talked about, because those men have, it's hard enough for women to come forward. It's hard enough, you know, the experiences are not where they need to be in terms of the response and the support that's given. Far from it. But it's even less for men.
Well, as you mentioned, Ali, about the sexual assault on men, it's especially bad if it's a teenager by, say, a school teacher. And it's a case of, oh, you were lucky, weren't you? When you're about a 13, 14-year-old lad getting sexually assaulted, and that double standard. If it was a man who'd done that to a 13, 14-year-old girl, there'd be proper public outcry.
You see that across all types of abuse. I mean, some of the, you know, having the honor, and I will call it an honor, of being able to write and deliver training courses to try and raise awareness. And we've had some pretty good courses that we've run in theatres and all sorts. It meant that we really had to do our research. You know, the things you're talking about there with the different ways that things are looked at. You know, you can even go, you know, to more recently, we saw the story of the Spanish football president that ended up being sacked for what he did. I don't agree with what he did, full stop anyway. But someone actually raised the point, well, actually, a couple of weeks before that, let's have a look at this incident. A jockey won a horse race, and he stood there having his photo taken at the end. And the owner of the horse, who was there having pictures taken, she grabbed his face and kissed him. And he was like, whoa, a bit shocked. There wasn't that same outcry. Why? Because she did exactly the same thing as the male did. It's just looked at in a completely different fashion. And even all the way through to when you see men that lose their life as a result of domestic abuse, look at the statistics on the charges that are brought. The majority of cases where females lose their life as a result of domestic abuse result in a murder charge, and rightfully so. It should be that way. But for the men that have lost their lives, if you look over a 3 or 4 year period, less than 20% are charged with murder where there's a female perpetrator. The majority are charged with manslaughter. Why is there a difference?
And they get less time as well.
Yeah.
I think the other thing is that I've heard of situations where a man is sexually assaulted, is in effect raped by women, because that is entirely possible, because the sexual response is biology. It doesn't equate to consent. And the response when they report it is ridicule, and almost one of like, oh, lucky you, mate, you know, and you're like, hang on a minute here, there's a violation there, there's an abuse and an assault and something that is really, really wrong. Yet there's not that acknowledgement.
No, and this is portrayed in the media as well. You know, the group program I used to run for men, one of the sessions looked at media responses, and this is globally as well. Yeah, one of the stories that was looked at was of a man who had barricaded himself in the bathroom and phoned the police for help because he'd gone back to the flat of the woman that he was dating, and she would not stop having sex with him. She was just demanding it, and he didn't want to, and he'd locked himself in the bathroom and called the police. The article, when you read it, also talks about when the police attended, they couldn't keep a smile off their face. And the article was at the title line was translated, she can't say no. And they made a real joke of it. Yeah, again, flip that on its head so it's the other way around, it would have been completely different. You know, when Jay-Z was hit by his wife's sister, you know, the headline article that everybody talks about was Jay-Z's 100th problem, making real light of the situation. But it's not a laughing matter at all. We talk about, you know, and I hate the phrase, and I'm going to kick myself for even saying it. We talk about toxic masculinity. I don't believe in it. I think it goes a whole nother level, and we have to talk about toxic society. But when we talk about toxic society, we have to talk about where these messages are coming from. Where is it that we're getting these messages that men are bad? Where is it that we're getting these messages from that it's not okay to talk out if you're a male victim of domestic abuse? We have to look deeper. Why can't men? Why don't men feel that they're able to go to the police? Firstly and foremostly, because they don't feel they're believed. Why don't they feel they're believed? You look at the bigger picture and think, right, so if men are going to the police and they don't feel they're believed, or, you know, they're looked at with suspicion when they're saying, I'm a victim of domestic abuse, why might that be? You then start looking at, how do the police get trained on domestic abuse? Who provides that training? Safe Lives provide police training across the UK. It's called DA Matters. If you look at a lot of the work that Safe Lives do, they will acknowledge male victims, but it's predominantly female victim. I spoke myself through social media to one of the people that delivers the course and just raised the question, great work you're doing, fantastic. Can I just ask though, what acknowledgement do male victims get? Well, we do mention male victims, and we do say that men can be victims of domestic abuse. However, predominantly the victims are female. So we approach it from female victim, male perpetrator. And that just made me take a step back and think, hang on a minute. If this is the way we're approaching training to the police, what are they going to be thinking when they get called to an incident of domestic abuse? What are they going to be looking at? And unfortunately, my experience from all the men I worked with, from my own research as well, is that they are looking at the man as the perpetrator. There's research that you can look at out there that quite often will say, what did you do to make her behave like that? And that's the reaction from the police. I'm not saying all police are like this. I've worked with some absolutely fantastic officers, but these are officers that are using their own initiative, and they're looking at the situation. And we can't blame our police officers if they're trained to deal with it in this way. That would be unfair. But this is where toxic society is coming from. What is putting that message there? Who is it that's delivering that message? We can't blame at the feet of men.
The question is, why is there a need to assign a gender to perpetrator or victim?
There's not.
Because surely, if we are aiming for a society which has equality, then that's a really important step, is recognizing that the perpetrator and victim can be any gender.
Absolutely. And, you know, with my book, is, you know, as I say quite openly, a number of female victims, a number of colleagues that have been female victims that I've worked with read my book and came back saying, I found it really interesting because, you know, all that stuff I was reading, that happened to me.
Mm-hmm.
I know, because it could happen to anybody. It
Uh-huh.
doesn't have to be gender specific.
Yeah.
Going back to the police, Lee,
Yeah.
in your travels, have you come across any better forces than other ones who are a bit more ahead with this domestic violence and perpetration and looking after victims?
I'd like to say yes. I have come across some good officers. The most contacts I've had with officers are in Worcestershire, where I am. It's been some time now that since I worked within the services, but there are some really good officers that I could talk to within that service. I've also had some negative experiences within my area with men that I've been working with. And there are some forces across the UK that, you know, the more I get emails when I'm doing research, when I'm talking to people and hearing about certain forces, there are some that need to take a real long, hard look at themselves and the way they treat male victims, because it's taking people like me that advocate for men to go and say, you need to stop, you need to look at this, and put in all the evidence in front of them before they'll take any notice. Because, you know, before I started doing my research, the overwhelming majority of men that came to us and said, help, the police aren't taking me seriously. And actually, when we started engaging in conversation via email, and I still have all these emails, they're quite open to communicate down the complaints channel until you challenge. And when you challenge, that veil comes down and they go inside themselves and they don't want to communicate with you anymore. Now, these experiences is what led me, when I did my master's on understanding domestic and sexual violence, I decided to take the route for my dissertation around looking at men's experiences of the police, because I was the only man on the course. It's very, very rare to have a man on the course, which I'd like to see change, because it changed my perspectives in some ways of looking at female victims and perpetration from men. And it really opened my eyes to some areas. But it also opens that conversation. Now, they were talking a lot about female experiences of reporting to the police, which absolutely disgusted me. Some talking about their own experiences as well. And I thought I want to look a bit more into male experience, because, you know, men don't report that. I know this, but I want to know why. So I decided for my dissertation to look at men's experiences of reporting and the impact it had on them, because I think that's really, really important to recognize and how that impacts them. And I decided to call it Police Help or Hindrance. I have sent it, since it's been completed, to a couple of organisations that do publish them on their websites. But the shock for me was I was expecting a very balanced response. And the very simple question, police help or hindrance, not one said that they thought they were a help to a male victim. And actually, some of their experiences were absolutely shocking. And if it wasn't for the fact with the research and the protecting of the identity of the men that were involved, I would love to challenge these police forces, but I'm not able to in that way. So it's about raising the awareness of their experiences and actually saying to police officers, you need to check your behavior and how you're dealing with these male victims. Now, what I found most shocking was one of the gentlemen said to me, I finally found the courage to report. I went to the police. I made my statement. It took 2 hours. I was getting that feeling they're not taking me seriously. They were asked questions like, well, what did you do to make her do that? But they did say, we will go and interview her. They interviewed her and a counter allegation was made. What that resulted in was his complaint being put to one side while they investigated the counter allegation. Now, my first question is why? He was the person that made the complaint. But they started investigating him and this counter allegation. And, he engaged. He answered their questions. He did everything they asked them to do. And 9 months later, they decided there was no case to answer for. And he said, that's fantastic. I knew there wouldn't be. What about my complaint? And they said, well, there's been no incidents for the last 9 months. So, there's no further action. And it wasn't even investigated. The problem is people talk about false allegations. It's one of the biggest things that men face that I've worked with when it comes to domestic abuse, either the threat of false allegations it's the same thing all the time. If you do this, I'm going to tell the police you did that, because who are they going to believe, me or you? And that is a massive fear that a lot of the men that I've worked with face. Now, some people will challenge me and say, false allegations aren't real. Look at the prosecution rates. But what they don't tell you is, with false allegations in law, once a complaint is made, they only have 6 months to investigate it and be able to say, we're bringing forward a charge of false allegation. These investigations take a lot longer. So that law in itself of 6 months, it's not even worth the paper it's written on.
But I suppose what I would also add to that is sometimes the threat of that and alone stops the disclosure.
Yeah.
Now, I would also say that the threat of that on both genders stops the disclosure, because these, again, are not gender-specific issues.
No.
Yeah, 100%. And, like I said, I see it from both sides with what I do. I've challenged police. I still do now when females talk to me about it. The only reason I talk about that is because that's where my focus lied with my dissertation. So it's absolutely right that you raise it, that this does happen on both sides.
Mm-hmm. But I think also that means that in general, our response as a society to claims and allegations and disclosures of domestic abuse leave a lot to be desired.
Absolutely.
The support for anyone experiencing that leaves a lot to be desired.
Yeah.
Because that sense of being disbelieved, of not understood, of the complexities of those situations is really poorly managed. We have a long way to go. A long way to go.
And I think I think you've got to look at that when you're talking about the police and changes in general to society. That's why, the violence against women and girls strategy was a massive landmark moment. And you know what? I joined with everybody else when that came out and stood and clapped, because it was like, wow, this had to happen.
Mm-hmm.
But where's it?
It comes back to my original, one of my original comments, doesn't it? Which is, when is it time to drop the gender out of the conversation and just talk about the issue?
Yeah.
Because that issue applies to all genders, to all parts of our community. And actually, if we want an equality in terms of the response and in terms of the service, then we maybe need to have a look at dropping that gender.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I'm going to ask a question, Rich, if you were talking about being a victim of domestic abuse and someone said to you, well, that's fine, you're covered under the Violence Against Women and Girls Act.
That's got no relevance whatsoever.
And this is what we face. They made male victims a subsection in the Violence Against Women and Girls strategy. How is that recognizing male victims in their own right as victims of quite serious crime? It doesn't. This is why this whole gender narrative, this whole gender subject that, society seems so rigid about following, needs to...
It's obsessed by it.
Yeah.
And going back to what you're saying about the scales before, Lee, and how they're tipping up, we only rise, that saying is, we only rise by lifting others.
Yeah.
We can't keep pushing people down to make ourselves feel good or whatever these other people get out of it.
Yeah.
We have to lift each other up.
thing is, as a woman, I actually want as many champions on my side as I can possibly get. And I don't understand why I would create an enemy of an entire gender by not recognizing that this issue impacts them. Because surely that's a champion I would much rather have in my corner that stands with me to say, yeah, let's fight this together, because this shouldn't be happening to anyone.
And do you know what's really interesting? And anybody that listens to this, I would say to you, have a look for yourself, because actually I might be sitting here talking about some of the experience that I've got and talking about wanting this equality and talking about us wanting to do it all together. But if you look at social media and you look at who it is that's challenging the people that are saying, what about, never mind that, what about the issues facing women? It's not me. It's not Rich. It's not other men.
There's a lot of women.
It's predominantly women that are now challenging that. And that needs to happen, because we get, and I've had it myself through the years of doing it, I've had it thrown at me that I'm misogynistic, which, I'm sorry, for me is laughable. And anybody that knows my work and what I've done would laugh at that as well. But you can't throw that and try and shut down the conversation by saying that when it's a woman challenging another woman's viewpoints.
But they still get shouted down. They still get those hate messages as well.
They do. They do, 100%.
I'm
How
looking
does it change?
for those. That should be interesting.
What's that?
I said those comments should be interesting. I'm 100% comfortable with what I've said.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you should be. And you should be, because you haven't said anything at all. Nothing has been said here at all that isn't championing equality for everybody. That's the importance of conversations like this. I've been pulled on things that have been said, yes, but domestic abuse is more serious towards women. And I say, in what way? Well, look how many women are killed. I said, right, you're looking just at violence. You're looking at just one aspect of it, and it needs to be looked at. Don't get me wrong at all, that level of death in women as a result of domestic abuse is not acceptable whatsoever. But also you've got a number of men. Yes, but it's a smaller number. So what? One person, whether they be male or female, losing their life because of, as a result of domestic abuse, is wrong. You know, I've done work with the Paul Lavelle Foundation up in the Wirral, and you know that's a foundation that was set up as a result of Paul Lavelle losing his wife to his partner, and it's horrific. Are we saying that, you know, the death of Paul, the death of any other man, isn't as important as the death of all the names of the women that are read out in Parliament? Because they are. You know, some of the physical assaults on men. I worked with a man who, you know, he was a big bloke, and he got into an altercation where his partner was extremely drunk, and there are witnesses to this, and it only didn't go any further in court because he didn't want it to go any further. She was getting drunk, she was getting leery, she was shouting at people, she was having a go at people in the pub, and he went, "Love, come on, let's just go home," because he felt embarrassed. And that's what he said to me. I felt embarrassed. He said, I didn't speak on the way home, and on the way back we had to go through the underpass. As we went under the underpass, she started having a go at me, and she was like, "You're not a man, you're a poor excuse of a man." And he was just like, I'm not getting into this conversation. And he tried to carry on walking. And she screamed at him, "Look at me when I'm talking to you." And as he turned around to look at her, she slammed a 12-inch stiletto heel into his chest, narrowly missed his heart. He had to have life-saving surgery. Are you telling me that that isn't serious? Because it is. Even to the extent of emotional abuse, you know, the impact that has on people. I remember very clearly from my own experience, you know, the day that my perpetrator decided that she wanted to end our relationship, You know, she already had another relationship. She'd had several in the whole time that we were together, which I found out later. She looked me square in the eye and said, "Come on, be serious. How could I be attracted to someone like you? Look at you. You disgust me. You've let yourself go." And I was like, wow, yeah, all right. That must be the case. If that's what you're telling me, that's got to be the case. What did that do to my self-esteem? When you're told that day after day, week after week, year after year, what does that do to you? It drives you down, and you look
I
for
think
a way
that's
to
where
escape.
there's a lot of people who hold in their heads the view that domestic violence is just physical, that domestic abuse is just physical. And it's not.
It's not.
Far from it.
Far from it. And the emotional abuse, while it doesn't leave physical bruises and injuries, can be every bit as debilitating.
Well, there's those poor kids, aren't there? They've hung themselves, completed suicide because of bullying and abuse.
Yeah.
And when we're talking about emotional abuse in the realms of a relationship, then what we are talking about is very intimate bullying, very intimate, intense bullying. And in there may well be elements of coercive control. There may be elements of gaslighting, you know, all of those that interweave in amongst all of that. And they are incredibly debilitating.
Yeah.
And that it can be experienced by anyone.
Let me share a story with you, and you know, I'll share it with you how I do when I do talks, when I talk about men's experiences of domestic abuse. And I'll tell you exactly the way I tell it, and it has such an impact when I do the talks, on the few times that I've used this story when we're talking about the different behaviors that men face, you know, some of the experiences that we've had. So when we're talking about impact on men's mental health, I work with a guy who, you know, to his own admission, he could be a little bit forgetful. He would put things down, forget where he put them. It was just a common thing. It happens. And 9 times out of 10, it was his car keys. So he put a little practice into place that he bought himself a bowl that he put on the shelf just inside the door. And every day when he came home, he would put his keys in the bowl. Now, he remembers clearly the first time this happened, that he came home from work, he put the keys in the bowl. He remembers putting them there because that's what he did. It became his ritual, his routine. And he said to his partner, "Oh, my mates are in a band, are playing tonight. I'm going to go along and support them. Is that all right?" "Yeah, fine." So he went upstairs, got changed, everything ready, came downstairs. "See you later, love." Reached for the bowl, keys weren't there. I swear to God, I put them there. So we then started retracing his steps back around the house, trying to find them everywhere he'd been since he got home. And he's like, "I can't find them. What the hell have I done with these?" And then went back downstairs, went to check the bowl again, and they were by the side of the bowl. And he was like, "I didn't see them there a minute ago." But yeah, okay, won't think anything of it. Now this kept reoccurring, the keys not being there, to the point that he was questioning his own sanity. And it was really pulling him down. There's a couple of times he said to his partner at the time that, you know, have you moved my keys? "What are you accusing me of?" I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm just saying, "Have you moved my keys?" "Why would I want to move your keys?" "All right, no problem." This went on for about 6 months. And then on the one day, his mental health just dipped massively to the point that he started questioning himself. And he was like, "Jesus, you know, is this happening?" So on the one day, he was going to go out and the keys weren't there. And he was like, "No, do you know what? I know I put them there because I only did it 5 minutes ago. This ain't funny anymore." And, you know, just the impact of it all. He went upstairs, started looking anyway, and he thought, "No, I know I put them there." So he stopped at the top of the stairs and he looked over the banister and just waited and watched. And after a couple of minutes of standing, just watching the bowl, I saw my wife put my keys back in that bowl and sat and thought, "Have I just seen that? Did I just see that correctly?" And I went downstairs and I challenged her. And the reaction I got was, "What are you accusing me of?" I said, "I just saw you." And she burst into tears and said, "I found them down the side of the sofa, and I know how it's been affecting your mental health. So I put them back because I didn't want you to suffer." Now, I knew that was rubbish straight away because I hadn't even been sat on the sofa. The funny thing was, well, I say the funny thing was, but it wasn't funny really. My keys never went missing from that bowl again.
Mm.
Now, I used to tell that story in that way, and it's kind of that realization moment towards I get the end, because when I used to change it from talking about this man to I, people didn't pick up on it to start with. But by the time I finished, they were like, "Oh my God." And I used to just come and sit on the edge of the stage and say, this might seem like quite a menial story to some, but actually what that led to was me considering taking my own life while that was going on, because I thought I was seriously losing the plot, and I couldn't comprehend what was happening to me. So it's quite serious. It's very, very serious in that regard. When we're talking about the impact of being made to feel like that, one of my best friends talked about his experiences, and his partner, who he thankfully didn't spend years in, he lost his job. So he was given a list of things to do around the house, which he was like, "That's fine. I'm not working. I'll do that. I've got no problem with that." But then when his partner was coming home from work, she would say to him, "I've had a busy day. I don't want you talking to me. I don't want you acknowledging me until I've had time to decompress." And he thought, "Okay, I'll respect that. I'll respect that. I know people have to wind down." But then on the one day, and this is something he talked to me about, he said she came home. I was watching something on TV. I'd done all my jobs. I thought, "Do you know what? I'll sit down and watch them up." And she walked into the room and sat right in front of him on the footstool, picked up the remote, changed the channel, started watching something else, didn't even acknowledge him. He just sat there, didn't say a word. And after about 20 minutes, she turned around and said, "You think it's all right to sit on your backside and do nothing all day?" And he said, "Hang on a minute, I've done the jobs you asked me to do. What's the issue?" And this is the first time he spoke to me about it. "Mate, that's abusive." "Is it?" "Yes. What would we say if you did that to her?" But he didn't recognize it as being abusive. And these behaviors really have an impact on people.
But I think that's where, regardless of gender, when you're in that situation, you don't recognize that as abuse.
As we talked before, Ali, it becomes the norm.
It becomes the norm, and sometimes it's an accumulation. It starts off small and the snowball grows, and it's not until your sense of worth and your sense of belief and assurance in yourself is so eroded that you're almost at a point where you cannot recognize that this is happening to you now.
No.
Because it's snuck up and it's been so insidious and consistent that you haven't noticed the normalizing of those behaviors and responses. You haven't noticed the incremental acceptances that this is okay until you've totally lost agency.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we've got to recognize this. We've got to recognize, I know the stories I've shared, again, they're male stories because, that's what I do.
Mm-hmm.
But it's right the way through society. It wasn't that long ago that I was in a supermarket. I was in the queue, and from behind me, I could hear a bit of a disagreement going on between a couple, and the female, she was really going in on a partner in front of everybody, and he just looked as though he wanted the ground to swallow him up. And some of the things she was saying, I was just lost for words. And I turned around, I said, "Excuse me, love." I said, "That is not acceptable. You cannot speak to him in that way. On what level is that acceptable? Because if he was doing it to you, this would be another matter." And the shop assistant who was manning those tills asked me to stop. So I paid for my goods. They left. And I actually asked, I said, why did you ask me to stop? That was unacceptable behavior on her part. That's why I challenged it. Look at the poor guy. Because we don't want you making a scene in the supermarket. Well, what was happening before I challenged her?
The other problem with that, Lee, though, is even though they're having that argument, or she's having an argument, you then become that enemy, the common enemy between those two.
But that's quite common in domestic abuse situations. And that's almost like that victim-perpetrator dynamic where the hard part is actually disclosing and the realization to yourself and others that you are in a victim situation.
Yeah. But would I have been stopped? The question is, would I have been stopped? Would I have been asked to stop?
If the dynamics were the other way around?
I don't think I would have.
No.
Well, they've done those social experiments, haven't they, on YouTube and wherever else, where they've had a man attacking a woman in these terms, pretending to, and people have come in and stopped that. When they've reversed the roles, people just laughed and gone, he deserves it, and whatever else.
Yeah.
But I think this is where, and I'm going to get really controversial here again, social media, there is content out there that I feel physically ill when I see. And that is, in general, the content that one gender is vilifying and pulling down and ridiculing the other. One sector of population is vilifying, pulling down and ridiculing the other. There's a level of toxicity to it that demonstrates a complete lack of empathy, compassion, and respect for people in general. And especially when it is gender orientated, then no. That's unacceptable.
Not at all.
And it does neither gender any favours when they pick out and vilify the other. It doesn't do anyone any favours when we select a specific segment and vilify that part of our population. Because...
Sorry, Danny. Carry on.
No. What were you going to say, Rick?
I was just wondering, Lee, have you got any stats that will, when you're doing your research, were really quite surprising to you?
I think as I sort of alluded to earlier, the rates on charges when the roles are reversed were shocking. Certainly around how many female perpetrators are charged with manslaughter and how few are charged with murder. There's also, there's statistics out there that talks about, we hear a lot about getting into schools, getting into universities, getting into college and talking to students, male and females, about what is acceptable and what is not acceptable behavior from males, and having that conversation to stop that. However, organizations like Childline have done research at university age children, because they are still children. Some of them, when you're talking about age, where there's not dissimilar levels of abusive characteristics and behaviors between males and females. So why are we only focusing on putting that education there for talking about male behavior towards female partners, other students? Because the statistics support that it needs to be both ways, and that we need to be having that open conversation. When we're talking about some of the different areas of domestic abuse, when we talk about some of the behaviors that aren't physical, actually, there's lots and lots of stats that Mankind have on their website, because they are probably the biggest supporting agency for male victims within the UK, and only recently started getting funding, which is quite worrying. But when you look at some of those behaviors away from the physical violence, that actually more men will experience some of those more coercive behaviours than women, which I found very surprising because, I thought it would be statistically, from what you can see, that less men would, but there's clear evidence there that there's not. And it really opens up that whole kind of question. You need to step back and say, hang on a minute, are we taking the right approach here? Because statistically, we're seeing this here. The evidence is here. It's been here for a long time. I think you've got to be very careful when you look at statistics and research, because you have to remember that the majority of research that's out there comes from a feminist perspective, because that is research that's been going on for a long, long time. It's only quite recently that you see more research coming looking from a male perspective in terms of victims. And it really does, if you can approach it open-mindedly and looked at it, it does massively support the whole conversation we're having here about taking gender out of the equation and looking at the bigger issue. Now, we used to campaign, and the slogan for our campaign is abuse is abuse, not a gender issue. And it gathered a lot of support, and the majority of people who are open to the conversation agree that that is the case. So why is there a big subsection that says we cannot take the gender out of it? We have to look at it because it is gender-based abuse.
As you mentioned earlier, Lee, it's probably to do with money.
I was going to say, I'm going to be controversial now, and I am going to put myself on the line and say it is domestic abuse in terms of support services has become a business. It's not about support with the big agencies. It's not about supporting the victims anymore. It's about the money. Now, a former head of one of the services, there's lots of reference to it out there that you can find, did actually say, I know there are male victims, but as an organization, we will never accept it and say that in public because it could affect our funding. When this is being said, that to me says, stop. Someone high up needs to look at this and say, hang on a minute, that is not the right attitude. We need to go back to the start in how we're commissioning these services and make sure there are services for all. Now, that is happening. The majority of services that are being commissioned now, when they come up, are saying there has to be male service provision as well. It's not at the level it needs to be. Now, I'm not saying that we need to take money away from female services. I am saying to anybody, any politician that will listen, female services need more money. However, we need proportional representation. So if we're saying 1/3 of victims statistically are men, I think it's more. But because of, the issues that are there, we don't have the services to help identify that either. But if we're saying 1/3 is a men, the amount of funding that they put to female services has to stay, has to increase. However, that's 2/3. You have to take at least half, the value of half that budget, and find that money from somewhere to put into male services to have proportional representation.
And I'm going to stress that point, Lee, because what we're not saying is taking money away from
Absolutely not.
services. What we're arguing for is more. What we're arguing is that there needs to be a proportionate budget size for men's services too.
100%. I would never say take away from female services because they are stretched to breaking point as it is. They need more.
Well, I sometimes I'm forced to consider that actually, if we went back to the very basic concepts of equality, stripped out the gender and the inequality at the base roots of our conversations, what that would do in terms of reporting stats, what that would do in terms of visibility, and what that would do in terms of overall offender rates.
And policing.
Because that actually opens up a whole different style of conversation. It opens up a whole different style of education and training and acceptable and unacceptable standards of behaviour. You know, because there's a huge outcry in terms of the objectification of women, yet there's still a massive amount of the objectification of men in social media and such like, that you're thinking, if I switch the genders of that person within that snippet or that film, that would be screamingly unacceptable. Yet nobody's blinking and everybody's going, well, like, yeah, that's okay, that's cool, isn't it? That's funny, that's amusing. No, it's not. It's not. And that has to be addressed too.
Well, taking the genders out of it, it stops the finger pointing and the blame of one against the other.
It just says this behaviour, regardless of who it's aimed at or who perpetuates it, is wrong.
Yeah. And I think I'm reminded, and this is something that we need to acknowledge. And I was just reminded it because, you know, I was just, you know, as you were talking, I was reading the words written behind you. And, you know, regardless of whether it's a man or whether it's a woman, being in an abusive relationship is trauma, and it impacts the well-being and the long-term well-being of that person that experiences it. And we need to make sure that anybody that experiences this level of trauma has the chance to escape that relationship, has the support to be able to escape that relationship, has the people to be able to talk to understand what's happened to them, to be able to put themselves in a position where they at least stand a chance to be able to move forward and live a successful and happy life. I was lucky. I was extremely lucky with my situation on meeting my wife that I'm with now. I know a lot of men that haven't been. You know, I've lost men that I supported, that I tried to support, that could see no other way out and couldn't carry on. We need to rethink the way that we're approaching this, and we need to ensure that we recognize trauma as being trauma, as abuse as being abuse, regardless of who the victim is.
And I think that means that the support services, the people that are the voices and the ears that these things are disclosed to, need to respond in such a way that what they don't end up doing is layering further trauma, further outrage, and further injury on top of that initial experience.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we have to make sure that the services that are put in place for victims are suitable and designed for that service. Because, no disrespect, as a man that's experienced domestic abuse, had I known that what I was experiencing was abuse, if I was given a phone number to call and I called that number and the voice at the end of the phone said, "Hello, Women's Aid," I wouldn't have spoke. I would have put the phone down. It has to be a service that is designed to support the client group that they're there to support.
I would agree wholeheartedly. So,
I was wondering, Dee, sorry, Ali, is if people want to read your dissertation, where can they find it?
At the moment, it is, I sent it to Mankind Initiative for them to put on their website, because they do share dissertation works on their research website. There is also Jonathan House Ministries that can be found on the internet. They are putting on a bit at a time, because the approach when they read it was, wow, this is powerful. There's a lot to be digested here. We want to release it a little bit at a time so people can focus on the piece that we put out. But it is there for people to be able to look at. I would also say as well, you know, this isn't a shameless plug, but my book, Break the Silence, a support guide for male victims of domestic abuse, it's been successful with male victims and survivors. So it's been very successful as a resource for professionals from lots of different backgrounds. There are several male services in the country that have been built on the back of my book, in understanding how to support and the dynamics of a male abusive relationship. So if you're from housing, if you're working healthcare, if you're a solicitor, if you're a police officer, you know, even down to students that are learning about these things, the reports coming back from people from these backgrounds that have bought the book have said that this is an invaluable resource. At the University of Worcester, they've put it on the approved reading list for their criminology and domestic abuse masters and training courses that they have, because they recognize that it is a resource that needs to be there. And as I said, some of the emails that I've had from men experiencing domestic abuse that feel extremely alone and not recognizing, do you know what, mate, this is bigger. There are lots of men out there that experience this. Read some of their experiences. If we've got men coming to us saying, your book saved my life, we need to keep getting it out there, because how many more people are we going to stop from taking that step because they don't see any other way out?
Yeah, we'll put your book, a link to your book in the show notes.
Perfect.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Lee. It's been an absolute pleasure having a conversation with you. I'm just sorry that we have to have a conversation about the inequality in response there, because this is something that happens and can happen to anyone. It's not a gender-specific issue.
No.
Thank you so much,
Thank
Lee.
you, Lee.
Pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.